Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today, where I'm going to learn about a very, very important issue. Maybe the most, the top issue. Granted, this is from a year ago, but as we all know, the migration crisis. Well, it has transcended more than 1 year of news cycles and politics and stuff like that. It's a big issue. So this is the EU's migration crisis explained by TLDR News EU. The reason I'm watching this one is because I typically wait 1 year. I mean, for news stories and stuff, I don't, but I don't know. In typical, I wait a year, and yeah, it was a huge burp, and you're welcome for not recording that. Anyway, TLDR News EU, check them out, link down below. The EU's migration crisis explained. But yeah, I wait a year up until I react to a video. That's what I was saying, typically. Let's do it. This is a big one, guys. This is a big one.
This video was brought to you by Skillshare.
By the way, if I take a drink of this smoothie, I apologize, I guess. I don't know. It's just sitting here, and I was drinking it. Anyway, I don't usually eat well on camera.
If you
But I might. I'm not going to promise I won't.
even glance at the headlines, it can feel like Europe is souring on immigration. In just the last week, Switzerland's federal elections were won by the migrant skeptic Swiss People's Party. Inferior ministers from across the EU released a statement demanding tighter immigration rules, and even the usually liberal Olaf Scholz gave an interview with Der Spiegel, arguing for a more aggressive deportation system. While this renewed focus on immigration is in part...
It's interesting to me that immigration is such a gigantic topic here in America and in Europe for totally different reasons.
Reaction to the recent events, namely a Europe-wide rise in anti-Semitic offences and Hamas-based terror attacks in France and Belgium, immigration has been rising steadily up the EU's agenda for some time now. In France, Macron said last month that he wanted to significantly reduce immigration. In Italy, Meloni has called for a naval blockade of the Italian coast and warned that the EU could be overwhelmed by immigration. And in the Netherlands, Mark Rutte's government was brought down by internal disagreements over immigration. So in this video, we're going to take...
I mean, in Europe, we're talking almost exclusively about refugees, right? Whereas in America, we're talking about illegal immigration.
Take a look at why this migration...
So both of those are a little bit different avenues than typical standard migration, where people, go through this big, long, arduous process to migrate to a new country, especially like to a Western country. And instead, they either come in illegally, like in America, or they come in through a refugee asylum type thing.
Is such a hot topic in the EU at the moment. Why the EU's current system doesn't work, and whether the EU can fix it.
Oh boy.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell
subscribe to this
to
dude.
stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos.
They're excellent.
So, let's get straight into it. Why has immigration been rising up the EU's agenda recently? Well, the fundamental reason is an increase in migrant numbers. While the EU has seen a significant increase in what's sometimes known as regular migration, largely as a result of 4 million or so Ukrainians that have fled Putin's invasion, it's also seen a significant increase in what's known as irregular migration.
Okay, so these are in thousands. So 5 million, 2022. Okay.
It's also seen a significant increase in what's known as irregular migration.
What's interesting about American immigration is no one actually has any clue, basically. At least that's what they tell us. No one has any clue what the actual numbers of illegal immigrants here are in America. It's like, like, within 10 million, we have estimates.
i.e. asylum seekers and...
And there really are a lot. I'm sorry, I know this is about Europe. But I just wanted to mention, if you're at all interested in about America illegal immigration, it is extremely common, guys. Like, it is extremely common to where there is a lot of illegal immigrants here in America. Anyway.
undocumented migrants. In 2022, the EU received over 900,000 asylum requests, a rise of more than 50% when compared to 2021, and the highest figure since 2016.
There we go, asylum.
Provisional data from this year suggests that asylum requests were up another 28% in the first half of 2023, which would imply an annual figure of about 1.2 million. Similarly,
I'm just curious if I can find an even more updated graph. So this is, what's this exact? Asylum applications for the EU. Asylum applications EU graph. I refuse the cookies. There we go. There's 2023, so what does he say here?
This year suggests that asylum requests were up another 28% in the first half of 2023, which would imply an annual figure of about 1.2 million.
So that actually ended up being a little bit of a high estimate, because it ended up being 1.12. But anyway.
Similarly, the EU's border agency, Frontex, detected over 300,000 unauthorized arrivals in 2022.
Okay, so we are talking a lot about illegal immigrants as well. Okay, I was unaware of that.
The highest number since 2016.
Although it's nowhere near America, to be honest, like those numbers.
Now, these might be Europe-wide figures, but certain countries have been acutely affected. Italy, for example, has received over 130,000 irregular migrants so far this year, already overtaking the total number from last year. Anyhow, these rising numbers have exposed and highlighted the various flaws with the EU's current migration system. Now, to understand the problems with the current system, we need to go back to the mid-90s, when the EU first introduced the Schengen area. For those who don't know, the Schengen area allows visa-free travel, i.e. freedom of movement, between member countries. And today,
I didn't know it was called the Schengen area.
Comprises of the vast majority of EU countries, and even a couple of non-EU countries, covering a total
Like the UK, right? Because you got to be able to go in and out of London.
area of over 4 million square kilometers and 423 million people. Now, while Schengen's introduction was celebrated as a great European success, it's also created an anxiety in some member states that other states would now have little incentive to properly police their borders, because without intra-EU borders, they could just push unwanted migrants onto other Schengen area countries. Now, to assuage this anxiety, the EU introduced the Dublin Accords, which required irregular immigration to be processed in the country of arrival. That means if, say, Italy lets a whole load of migrants pass into France without processing them, France can send them back to Italy. Unfortunately, this system created the opposite problem.
How would migrants get to Italy? I guess on a boat.
Put too much strain on the countries at the EU's external borders,
Like without going through another EU country.
often called frontier countries, which receive the majority of the EU's irregular migrants. As such, when migrant numbers
What is irregular migrant? He keeps saying this word irregular migrant, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that means. The movement of people across an international border without proper authorization. Okay, I guess I laugh just because it's an illegal migrant? Irregular? I guess I'm being, I don't know. Once again, I don't want to sound any kind of way or anything, but it's like irregular is not a descriptive word for that. I was like, what's irregular? I thought it was just like, oh, it's an irregular amount of people coming or something. No, it's illegal migrants. Sorry if that's offensive to say or anything.
have
I mean, it's actually controversial over here in America too for a while to call them illegal immigrants. I don't know, man.
risen recently.
I'm just trying to understand.
Frontier countries have reacted by implementing illiberal immigration policies, which has provoked criticism from other EU countries on human rights grounds. Late last year, for example, France criticized Italy for refusing to take in a migrant rescue ship, which was then docked in southern France. And Italy is currently feuding with Germany over its funding.
I mean, that just sounds kind of like you're mad they didn't take in the migrants because you don't want to take in the migrants? Okay.
Migrant rescue charities operating in the Mediterranean, which Italy thinks encourages irregular migration. Now, the EU has tried to remedy this issue with a voluntary solidarity
My headphones got screwed up.
solidarity mechanism, which obliges signed-up non-frontier countries to take in a few thousand migrants from the frontier countries. But it's not a permanent solution because, well, it's voluntary, which is why countries like Poland and Hungary haven't signed up to it, and both Germany and France temporarily pulled out of it after their spat with Italy. That's not all, though. There are at least two other problems with the EU's current migration system. Firstly, while they do have a common internal migration policy in Schengen, the EU has no common external migration policy. The current system is a confused mess of national and EU legislation, with a wide range of immigration policies.
I can imagine in the EU, if you want to compare it to America, because America has a lot of different states and then a federal government, it's got to be 10 times more confusing and complicated with the EU, because you guys have a bunch of countries with vastly different laws.
Now, some countries are more accepting of regular migrants. In 2021, for example, Poland issued nearly 800,000 work visas to non-EU citizens, more than the rest of the EU combined. Similarly, some countries are more accepting of irregular migrants. In 2016, for example, Italy granted asylum to nearly 95% of Syrian refugees, while Croatia granted asylum to just 12%. The second problem with the system is that the policies are just often poorly enforced. Many frontier countries lack the resources to properly police their borders or implement their policies. And this is especially true in the Western Balkans, which was one of the most popular routes for irregular migration into the EU in 2022. The EU has tried to remedy this by investing in Frontex, its border security force. But even if the EU was able to perfectly police its borders, it doesn't have the administrative capacity to process the number of irregular migrants currently arriving into the EU. According to the latest data available, the EU currently has an asylum application backlog of about 900,000, including backlogs of over 100,000 in Italy, Spain, France, and Germany. The EU also struggles to deal with the 60% or so of asylum seekers who have their applications rejected, with fewer than 1 in 5 successfully deported. Anyway, these two problems, the intra-European variation in attitudes towards external migration.
I think a big part of it is it's not cheap to deport someone, especially in a humanitarian way. It's not like that's cheap and easy to do, especially for millions of people. It's honestly cheaper just to not do anything, Which is obviously it's not all about money, but that is on the other side. A lot of it is all about money.
And the fact that many European countries struggle to enforce their external migration policies have
a lot of people are saying that over here in the States, it's a little bit of I don't know if it's a contradiction, but it's kind of hard to justify saying you want the government to spend a bunch of less money, but then also deport 10 million people, because deporting 10 million people is going to cost tens of billions of dollars.
Seriously strained Schengen. Distrustful of their neighbors' migration policies, many Schengen members have reintroduced border controls. At the time of writing, 10 countries have formally reintroduced border controls using Schengen's emergency mechanism, with many citing the recent spike in irregular migration. And a handful more have been quietly increasing border policing without notifying the European Commission.
Uh-oh.
You get the idea then. The EU currently lacks a cohesive external migration.
So they're impeding the freedom of movement between the EU a little bit. Is that what he's saying? for the sake of policing migration.
Policy. And this in turn is undermining its internal migration policy. That's why, for the past few years, the EU has been trying to come up with a new external migration policy. And at the moment, this seems to have two elements. The first is the new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, first proposed by the European Commission in September 2020, and finally agreed by member states earlier this month. Now, there's a lot in the deal, and if you want to know more, we'd recommend that you go and watch this video, which is linked in the description. But perhaps the most interesting element is the Mandatory Solidarity Pact, which aims to relocate 30,000 asylum seekers from frontier countries to non-frontier countries. Specifically, if non-frontier countries don't accept these migrants, then they'll be fined roughly €20,000 per migrant refused.
Holy crap. That's a very interesting aspect of this, like this whole migrant crisis type thing. I never considered the whole frontier, the incentives are misaligned a little bit with there being a frontier where a bunch of migrants are going into, and then, some other EU states or EU countries might just be like, they might not hold quite as strong a stance against it or what have you. They might not be as urgent. And that's an interesting aspect to it.
Which has provoked...
I mean, it's kind of the same here in America as well. There's states where, illegal migration, obviously the border states, they get all the illegal immigration. Now, even up here in Indiana, there's, like I said, there's tons of illegal immigrants. And when I say that, I'm not even saying that in necessarily a bad way. They're actually the hardest working people I've ever seen. But regardless, they're illegal immigrants, and they made it all the way up here to Indiana.
Some upset in countries like Poland and Hungary.
Poland and Hungary was not satisfied with the proposal, but they pushed us through, pushed through the proposal. So Hungary and Poland was totally left out of that. So after this, there is no any chance to have any kind of compromise and agreement on migration. Because legally we are, we are raped. So if you are raped legally, forced to accept something what you don't like, how would you like to have a compromise and agreement? It's impossible.
No, we'll get it.
Wow. Oh man, the EU politics must be so interesting with how diverse it is. I can only imagine.
Getting this deal done is a diplomatic success. The deal still needs to be negotiated with the European Parliament and then ratified, which means that it's unlikely to come into force for another few years. It's not just that deal, though. The second element of the EU's new external migration policy is a series of deals with so-called transit states, i.e. those countries which migrants transit through before reaching the EU, which involves the EU giving these countries money to help them police their borders more effectively. The first of these deals came into force in 2016, when the EU agreed to give Turkey billions of euros to stem the tide of migrants coming into the EU. And its success in...
That's interesting because it's a choke point, it's a... Yeah.
Encouraged the EU to sign similar deals with Libya in 2018, Morocco in 2022, and Tunisia in July of this year. But while these deals have been relatively successful, they have at least three problems. Firstly, reducing migrant flows from one transit country usually only increases migrant flows from another. This is what happened in 2016, because while the deal reduced flows from Turkey, migrants just started traveling via Libya instead.
Wow. They're not dumb, It's kind of, it's a serious issue, but I can't help but find that kind of funny. It's like, I don't know, it's like Jurassic Park, life finds a way, guys. They want in. they want to the EU, so they're going whichever way is open. Interesting.
And when the EU reached a deal with Libya, then they started coming via Tunisia. Secondly, it's just unsustainable. Again, Turkey is a good example here. Originally, Turkey was happy to take in the migrants itself, aided by EU funding. But now, Turkey has taken in an astonishing 4 million migrants, and public sympathy within the country is apparently waning.
I was going to say, what does Turkey do with these immigrants? They just take them in? Wow. Wow. I can see that causing some problem, like, or some, making Turks feel a certain kind of way.
Migration was a big topic in this year's elections in Turkey, and Erdogan is even trying to send back Syrian migrants to Turkish-occupied parts of Syria. And the third issue is that it's just not clear that these deals are consistent with the EU's values and human rights. In Libya, for example, the Libyan Coast Guard, which is really more of a regional militia than a national police service, has been accused of various human rights abuses, including detaining migrants in prisons and using them for slave labor. Ultimately,
What the?
given the competing electoral, demographic, and economic demands, it shouldn't come as a surprise that there's no easy solution for the EU when it comes to immigration. But the
What an absolutely profoundly difficult issue, because on one hand you've got people, you know what I mean, man, people, and it's the same over here in America. They're people and they want a better life for themselves and their family, and and they're hoping to find it in your country. And yeah, so on one hand my heart goes out to them, on the other hand I also understand, obviously, there's social services and different things that the people of those countries have been paying into for decades. And to have, people, foreigners come in who aren't even coming in through a legal process. Y'all know that's the whole crux of the matter, I think. And the whole cultural aspect to it. But, yeah, what a difficult problem.
continuing problems over the solidarity pacts demonstrate quite how politically difficult this problem is really becoming. A few weeks ago, we told you that we were making a physical newspaper.
Go check out their Skillshare link. Hey, if I was going to buy Skillshare, I'd buy it through these people. They're awesome. What a very informative video, and I am sorry if anything I said was offensive or whatever. You have to understand, I genuinely just try to understand these types of issues. It's not about being offensive or not offensive or whatever, left or right or anything like that. I just like to understand things. Most EU countries just don't have the capacity to integrate this amount of migrants. See, yeah. So what you end up with is a massive separated communities of migrants with completely different cultures, religions, and values, and this causes friction with the original population. Yeah. That about sums it up. That's part of the issue. Yeah. Woo! What a crazy issue. I don't even know what else to say about it. I have literally no solutions. I have no idea. Don't ask me. Don't elect me to Parliament. But I will follow the issue. I think it's interesting to follow. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.